You were never meant to hear this. Somewhere in the frozen silence of the Utah Territory, in the winter of 1847, 4 women vanished without a trace. No struggle, no footprints in the snow, just gone. Their husband, Ezekiel Whitmore, told the bishop they'd left voluntarily, in the middle of a storm, through mountain passes buried in ice, to see a sick relative no one could confirm existed. The church recorded his explanation, quietly, without inquiry, without question, because in Zion, obedience was protection, and questions were fire. But what if I told you? The truth was darker than even the church feared. What if the very foundations of that cabin at Mill Creek, that sanctuary carved into desolation, were steeped not in faith, but in blood? This isn't just a story of polygamy gone wrong. This is something else. Something older, something that predates Joseph Smith, predates Mormonism, something that bleeds through the cracks of religious order, where revelation becomes commandment and obedience becomes sacrifice, where men don't just control their families, they consume them. Ezekiel Whitmore was not merely a pioneer, he was a man driven by visions, private doctrines scribbled in hidden journals, secret rituals whispered in the name of celestial glory, and a theology twisted into something unrecognizable, something that required offering. This case was sealed for nearly 70 years, locked away by church authorities until 1920, when construction workers digging under a meeting house unearthed what had long been buried, literally. Beneath the stone floor, beneath years of silence, were fragments of a life never meant to be known. Pieces of women, pieces of symbols, pieces of a belief system the church quietly disavowed but never publicly admitted. And yet here we are, you, me, this moment, this truth clawing its way out of history's grave. Ask yourself, how many stories have they buried like this, and more importantly, why? Because what happened in Mill Creek wasn't an isolated act of madness, it was a glimpse into a larger system, a controlled history, a carefully manufactured narrative. If you're not ready to have that narrative shattered, leave now. If you are, come closer. Because this isn't just a mystery, it's a ritual, and once you hear it, you'll never unhear it. The Mormon Church of 1847 was not the institution you know today. It was raw, untamed, a wilderness religion forced into exile by mobs, laws, and bloodshed. Its leaders spoke of angels, golden plates, and new covenants. But behind the veil of revelation was a furnace of control, a system designed to mold men into patriarchs and women into vessels. Polygamy wasn't a side doctrine. It was the keystone of eternal hierarchy. The more wives a man had, the more kingdoms he would rule in the afterlife. Families weren't just bloodlines, they were dynasties in heaven. And Ezekiel Whitmore understood that system too well. When he arrived in the Salt Lake Valley, he brought 4 wives, each chosen not just for companionship, but for prophecy. That's what his journal would later suggest. He didn't marry for love, he married for structure, for spiritual architecture, to build what he called the eternal house of consecration. Sarah, the barren matriarch, Rebecca, the scholar, Mary, the mother-to-be, and Ruth, the lamb. Each fit a role, each had a purpose, and, as his writings would imply, each was to be sacrificed in turn. His neighbors found him strange, not dangerous, just quiet. Stern, the kind of man who believed more in rules than people. But isolation breeds obsession, and obsession inside doctrine is a loaded gun pointed inward. What began as devotion twisted into madness. In his final entries, Ezekiel began referencing texts no one in the church had sanctioned, writings about ancient bloodlines, forgotten prophets, the divine necessity of shedding innocent blood to seal covenants beyond death. He wrote in loops, repeated phrases like, "The first shall open the gate, the second shall prepare the flame, the third shall carry the burden, the fourth shall become the key." This wasn't theology, this was construction, ritual engineering, and then silence. By January, only Ezekiel remained at the cabin. His explanations were erratic, nonsensical, women disappearing into snowstorms, missionary groups no one else saw, sicknesses that left no mark. But the real sickness was in his eyes. Witnesses said he looked hollow, not grief-stricken, not fearful, just emptied, like something inside him had already been offered. But the question we must ask isn't just what happened to those women. It's what did Ezekiel believe he was doing, because belief, when weaponized, doesn't just distort truth, it replaces it. The most disturbing truths are never hidden in darkness. They're hidden in plain sight, wrapped in holy language, guarded by ritual, spoken in the tongues of prophets. That was the brilliance of Ezekiel Whitmore. He didn't hide behind madness. He hid behind Scripture. When Bishop Curtis visited the cabin in February, the snow was deep, 2 feet in some places, yet no tracks led away from the house. None. The land was undisturbed save for the area behind the cabin where the earth had been turned, worked and reworked beneath frost-hardened soil. Ezekiel said it was for root storage, but even untrained eyes knew no one digs like that in winter unless they're burying something they don't want found. And what of the cabin itself? Too clean, too quiet, every feminine trace scrubbed away. The bishop noted that the house felt wrong, not just empty, but violated. A home stripped of spirit. No sounds of domestic life, no warmth, just silence, and the faint smell of lye and smoke. It was Mary's room that disturbed them most. Her pregnancy had been far along, yet there were no signs of childbirth, no cradle, no linens, no blood, as if she had never existed. But they had existed. The visitors had seen them alive in December, had spoken with them, had watched Rebecca and Sarah thank them for deer meat with perfectly measured smiles, identical intonation as though rehearsed. That, too, had struck the men as odd, how the wives moved in harmony, as if bound by something deeper than obedience. Later, Thomas Garrett would swear under oath that he heard crying beneath the floor that night, muffled, desperate, human. But the others dismissed it, explained it away, the wind, the creaking of timbers. But Garrett never accepted that answer. He'd seen the look on Ezekiel's face when asked about the cellar, how his jaw clenched and his eyes flickered, how he said nothing for too long. Beaker, use silence is its own confession. There was something beneath that house, and Ezekiel wanted it kept there. The bishop filed his concerns quietly. The church was already a target. Scandal would bring federal wrath, so they watched, waited, prayed, and in doing so, enabled. But you don't have to wait. You're already seeing it, aren't you? The outline of something monstrous hiding in the folds of faith, and that's just the beginning. Because what lies beneath isn't just horror. It's doctrine, twisted and obeyed. By early March 1848, rumors had begun to seep through the tight seams of the Mormon community like water through cracked stone. Quietly, carefully, they asked each other the questions no one dared voice aloud. Where were the wives? Why was Ezekiel always alone? What did he do during the nights when the valley went still? But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Ezekiel Whitmore had stopped seeing himself as a man. In his hidden journals, unearthed decades later, his handwriting shifts in February. The lines become jagged, frantic. The words stop resembling thoughts and begin to take the shape of commands, not given to him, but given through him. He believed he had become an instrument. That God, his God, was no longer satisfied with devotion. That faith in its highest form must cost something precious, something irreversible. And so he began to call his wives keys, not names, not individuals, but sacred functions in a divine machine. Sarah, the first key, the opener of covenants. Rebecca, the second, the firekeeper. Mary, the third, the bearer. Ruth, the final key, the offering. He wrote, "The temple is not built of stone, It is built of obedience, blood, and silence. The Lord does not dwell in structures, but in sacrifice. 4 for 1, 1 for the eternal gate. When spring came and Bishop Curtis returned to the cabin, Ezekiel was gone. Not a soul had seen him leave. No trail, no letter, no witness, just absence, like the snow had swallowed him whole. But what the bishop found would unravel the fabric of the church's carefully preserved image for decades. Behind the cabin, beneath disturbed earth now thawed and heavy with rot, they unearthed fragments, shredded fabric, jewelry, bone. Nothing that could confirm death, but nothing that allowed for hope either. And deeper still, beneath layers of soil and stone, they found a circular pitlin, ed with charred wood, burned manuscripts, and ash. The smell was unforgettable, not of fire, but of purpose. Something had been done there, not in rage, but in ritual. This was no crime of passion. This was a sacrifice, but to what God? No one could agree. And that uncertainty, the inability to name the darkness, is what haunted them most. Because when evil hides behind Scripture, it wears the face of righteousness, and men follow it willingly. The church sealed the investigation within weeks. There would be no public inquiry, no burial, no trial, just a silence so heavy it felt like doctrine. The surviving records refer to it only as the Mill Creek anomaly. Clinical, detached, sterile, not a murder, not a tragedy, an anomaly. As if those women were never flesh and blood, but variables in a theological equation that had gotten out of hand. But here's what they couldn't erase: the fear, not of the public, not of the law, of the idea. Because Ezekiel Whitmore didn't invent his theology from madness, he found it between the margins of revelation, in the footnotes of prophets, in the forbidden commentaries passed in whispers among early Mormon mystics. Ideas no longer taught, but never truly denounced. Blood atonement, eternal sealing through sacrifice, celestial engineering. Fragments of these teachings still survive, scrubbed, reframed, or buried so deep in doctrine only the obsessed will find them. But they're there. And Ezekiel, he was obsessed. One recovered note, singed at the edges, preserved in a hidden pocket of his journal, reads, "When Adam offered blood, the garden was lost. When Abraham offered Isaac, a nation was born. When I offer mine, eternity will open." Let that sink in. This wasn't murder in the way you understand it. It was construction. Ezekiel saw himself as building something, a gateway, a holy mechanism. And his wives? They were components, living instruments to be broken open and offered. That's why no one talks about it, because the deeper you go, the harder it becomes to tell where faith ends and madness begins. And maybe that line doesn't exist. Maybe it never did. Because institutions aren't built on clarity, they're built on obedience, and Ezekiel obeyed, not the church, not the prophets, but something older, something that spoke in Scripture but breathed in fire. So, ask yourself, how many other anomalies were written out of history? How many other cabins held altars instead of kitchens? You were told this land was tamed by faith. But what if it was fed by it? And what if the most dangerous revelations were never false, just too true to survive? By the time construction began on the new meeting house in 1920, 72 years after Ezekiel Whitmore vanished, the land at Mill Creek had been all but forgotten. Time has a way of burying stories beneath layers of progress. New saints, new buildings, new prophets. The church had grown vast, respectable, institutional, but the soil never forgets. It started with a foundation trench. Workers struck something unexpected, stone, not native to the area, arranged in a circular pattern beneath the earth. At first, they assumed it was part of an old pioneer structure, but then they found the markings. Carved into the stones, half erased by erosion, were symbols no mason had placed, unfamiliar, geometric, ritualistic, symbols that bore disturbing resemblance to those found in esoteric Mormon fringe texts, the kind that had long been declared apocryphal or heretical. the kind no missionary ever preaches. And then came the bones. They weren't organized, they weren't buried with care, they were scattered in shallow layers, as if something had tried, half-heartedly, to hide them. Among the remains, a scorched iron ring still clung to a fragment of finger. The insignia on the band was unmistakable, a star enclosed within a circle of interwoven thorns. It wasn't just a grave. It was an altar. Church officials were notified immediately. Within days, the site was cordoned off, and records show a private delegation arrived from Salt Lake to handle the matter discreetly. What they told the workers remains unclear. What they removed from the site was never inventoried, but a photograph survives. Black and white, grainy, forgotten in a local historian's attic until decades later. It shows 3 men standing over the exposed trench. Behind them, just barely visible in the shadow, is the full circle of stones, charred, marked, and cold. The image was quietly suppressed, but once seen, it can not be unseen, because it confirms what the church feared most, that Ezekiel Whitmore's rituals weren't just madness. They were recorded, preserved in stone, soil, and bone, not a delusion, but a system. And if he built that system once, how many others have tried? How many succeeded? You're starting to feel it, aren't you? That sensation deep in your gut that whispers, this wasn't an isolated horror. This was a blueprint. Every blueprint leaves behind echoes, traces of its shape, its function, its intent. And Ezekiel Whitmore's design was no different. Though the church buried his name, though his journals were locked away in private archives, patterns began to emerge for those who knew where to look. In 1931, a missionary named Elder Jonas Caldwell went missing near Bluff, Utah, an outpost known for its isolation and deeply traditional congregations. His companion returned alone, shaken, unable to speak for 3 days. When he finally did, he spoke of strange symbols carved into the rock near an abandoned cabin and of voices chanting in a language he couldn't identify. The official report: exposure and hallucination. The church moved on. But the cabin burned to the ground within the week. In 1946, a young woman named Helen Pratt disappeared after reporting visions to her bishop in Cedar City. Visions of an ancient house with blood-stained floors and women praying in silence as a man stood over them holding scripture and a blade. Her disappearance was ruled a mental health crisis, but no search was conducted. The deeper you go into church records, unredacted journals, private diaries, letters withheld from the public, the more you see Ezekiel's fingerprints stretching across decades like vines from a poisoned root. Because he didn't just vanish, he scattered seeds, ideas, blueprints for a twisted theology that promised glory through obedience, transcendence through blood, and transformation through sacrifice. And in a faith already steeped in covenant language, where sacred oaths and eternal bonds are the framework of salvation, Ezekiel's interpretation was radical, but not illogical. That's what makes it so dangerous. He didn't create something outside the system. He amplified it, took the existing doctrines and turned the volume past human limits. And here's the question that haunts the church even now. Was he alone, or did others follow his path in secret? Because once a man sees salvation as a transaction, all that's left is the cost. And if blood is the currency of heaven, then how many have paid? How many still are? You think this is history? No, this is inheritance. There's something you need to understand about cults. They don't start with evil. They start with clarity, with certainty, with someone whispering, this is what God really meant. And when that voice is calm, confident, and cloaked in scripture, people follow, not because they're blind, but because they're hungry. Hungry for meaning, for safety, for order in a chaotic world. Ezekiel Whitmore understood that hunger better than anyone, and he fed it. After his disappearance, whispers of his teachings continued, not in sermons, but in secret meetings, handwritten tracts, and late-night discussions among those prepared for deeper truth. phrases from his journals began appearing in obscure fringe writings. The final key unlocks the eternal gate. Obedience is greater than mercy. The garden will reopen only through blood. By the 1950s, a group calling themselves the Order of Returning Saints had taken root in rural Idaho. Outwardly Mormon, inwardly something else. They followed all the familiar rituals, sang the hymns, paid tithes, but in their private gatherings they spoke of celestial offerings, of women as vessels, of the need to balance the eternal equation. And in 1959, 3 young women vanished during what was supposed to be a spiritual retreat. One of them, Ruth Ann Briggs, had written a letter days before. In it she said, "If anything happens to me, look in the writings of Ezekiel Whitmore. I think this isn't a retreat. I think it's a test." Her body was never found. Neither were the others. The order disbanded months later, or at least that's what was claimed, but no one was arrested, no one charged, no investigation made public. Because the truth is more dangerous than the crime. Ezekiel's doctrine didn't die with him. It multiplied, changed names, changed towns, but it never changed purpose. A promise cloaked in piety: obey, sacrifice, ascend. And those who believed, those who still believe, don't see themselves as monsters. They see themselves as architects of the next world. So you have to ask yourself, how far does this lineage reach? Where does faith end and replication begin? Because when evil disguises itself as devotion, it never truly dies. It recruits. The danger with history isn't what's remembered, it's what gets deliberately forgotten. By the 1970s, church archivists quietly began purging fringe materials from seminary libraries and community records. Doctrines deemed non-canonical, speculative, or inflammatory were pulled, sealed, or destroyed. But some documents didn't disappear. They went underground, passed from collector to collector, often anonymously, until they reached the hands of those who didn't just study the past, but believed it was a roadmap. One of those documents, unpublished, untitled, was found in 1981 by an excommunicated historian named Elijah Carr. He had spent a decade researching early Mormon ritualism, obsessing over inconsistencies, erased events, and conflicting witness accounts, but it was a single phrase hidden deep within a burnt letter that changed the course of his life. The house of the final key will be reopened before the 7th generation. Carr traced the line back to Ezekiel Whitmore, and it shook him, because according to genealogical records, the 7th generation of Ezekiel's bloodline had just been born. Twin girls, Ruth and Miriam Whitmore, born in Lehi, Utah. Their mother, a direct descendant of Ezekiel, was a quiet, reclusive woman who refused all contact with outsiders after their birth. Their father, listed as unknown. Carr tried to reach her. Letters, visits, calls. Nothing worked. Until one night, he received a manila envelope with no return address. Inside were photographs, crude, blurry, taken through a window. They showed the twins, no more than 7 years old, kneeling in what appeared to be a hand-dug pit. Around them, stones in a circle. A figure standing above them, cloaked in white, holding something long and metallic. Carr went to the authorities. No one believed him. He vanished 6 months later. Official cause, suicide. But his nabi, putties, hundreds of pages, were found hidden in a false wall in his study. On the final page, scrawled in handwriting that broke into a tremor, "It's not over, it never was. They're building the house again, brick by bloody brick. And now you understand, Ezekiel didn't vanish. He replicated, not in sermons, in bloodlines, and prophecy has a schedule. The 7th generation is here." The Whitmore twins disappeared from public record in 1995. No death certificates, no school enrollments, no medical files. One day they were there, photographed at a church picnic in Salt Lake, matching dresses, distant stares, and then nothing. Like ghosts smudged from a photograph, the only trace was a brief, unremarkable obituary for their mother. Anna Whitmore, age 34, sudden illness, private burial. No grave was listed. But 3 months later, a maintenance worker at an abandoned chapel outside Manti, Utah, filed a police report. He claimed to have found signs of recent occupation, candles arranged in patterns, children's shoes lined in perfect rows, and something far more disturbing, a symbol carved repeatedly into the wooden floor beneath the pulpit. A circle of thorns encasing a star. The same mark from the ring Ezekiel wore. The police investigated, briefly, but the case was marked vandalism and filed away. The chapel was demolished the following year, but fragments survived. A local photographer, obsessed with Utah's haunted architecture, had broken in days before the demolition. What he captured has since become legend among underground researchers of forbidden religion. In one photo, a small handprint in blood on the stone altar. In another, the remnants of an old children's hymn book, its pages altered with red ink, twisting lyrics into prayers for fire, for binding, for opening the gate. And in the final image, 2 sets of footprints, bare, leading from the altar to the far wall, and stopping, as if the children vanished mid-step, and maybe they did. Because some say the Whitmore twins were not victims, but vessels, raised not to live ordinary lives but to fulfill something, a ritual written in flesh, sealed by inheritance, and timed to awaken when the bloodline reached its 7th branch. Somewhere out there, they say, the house of the final key is being rebuilt, not metaphorically. Brick, wood, stone, ritual space, not a cult, a continuation. And those girls, they're not missing, they're becoming. So the question isn't where they are, it's what they've become, and what they're about to do. Because prophecy doesn't wait for permission, it executes. There's something ancient in this story, not just Mormonism, not just pioneer faith, something older than America, older than organized religion, a cycle that echoes across civilizations, a blueprint that surfaces when men believe too strongly and women are made into symbols. The house of the final key was never just a place. It's an idea, a structure you build in the mind before you ever lay the first stone. You start with obedience. You move to sacrifice, then you demand replication. It's always the same steps. Whether it's Sumerian blood rites, Aztec sky offerings, or early Christian martyrdom, the pattern holds. Ezekiel didn't invent it, he remembered it. He just dressed it in pioneer clothes and called it revelation. But here's the part that matters now. This is not just history, this is current, ongoing, active. Over the last 2 decades, independent researchers, ex-Mormons, folklore scholars, rogue genealogists have quietly tracked what they believe is the new order of consecration, a secretive sect descended from Ezekiel's theology. They don't publish, they don't evangelize, but every 7 years, around the winter solstice, there's movement. Cash purchases of isolated land in rural Utah and Idaho, supply deliveries made at night, surveillance footage of cloaked figures entering abandoned meeting houses. The last confirmed sighting of twin girls matching Ruth and Miriam's description came in 2009, captured on a gas station security camera near Kanab. They didn't speak, they paid in cash. But the attendant noted something strange. They both wore braided leather cords around their wrists, marked with red wax seals, and neither blinked the entire time they were in the store. The tape disappeared within days. The gas station burned down 3 weeks later. Coincidence or containment? Because once you start seeing the pattern, you realize something. Horrifying. They don't want power. They want completion. Ezekiel's writing spoke of a ritual that spans generations, a sealing that cannot be undone, only fulfilled. And he left behind a promise, one written in the final lines of his journal. When the gate opens, the house will rise, And through the sacrifice of the seventh, the world shall be remade. This isn't about murder, it's about rebirth. The bloodline was never lost. It was waiting. What no one wants to admit is that prophecy isn't written for outsiders. It's a private language, encrypted in symbols passed through blood and only truly understood by those who live inside the story. To us, the signs seem random. To them, it's a map. And that map, it seems, is almost complete. In March 2021, a burned vehicle was found near the Colorado-Utah border. Inside were the remains of a man in his late 60s, charred beyond recognition. No ID, no dental records matched. The only item untouched by the fire, a metal key on a leather chain. The key had one word engraved into it, hand-carved, nearly worn away: return. The case was classified as an accidental fire, another file closed, another body forgotten. But 2 months later, an anonymous package arrived at the Denver office of a cult deprogrammer named Susan Talley. Inside, a journal. Its cover was made of untreated leather, rough and scorched at the edges. Its contents, handwritten in a disjointed, frantic script, detail the final thoughts of a man convinced he had helped build something unholy. He claimed to be one of the original architects hired to design Sanctuary 47. He described its underground layout: 13 chambers, each with no windows, no electricity, no ventilation, only stone, salt-lined walls and drains in the center of the floor. He called them birthing rooms, and in the final pages he wrote, "They said the girls are ready, that the voices have returned, that the gate will open before winter's end. I shouldn't have signed, I shouldn't have taken the money, I can't sleep anymore. I see them in my dreams, twins, always staring, always smiling. They say I'm already inside the gate, that I never left, that I helped build it from the inside out." The journal was sent for analysis. It vanished in transit. No records, no tracking, just gone, erased, like everything else that GEOs. It's too close. Because this isn't about one man, one cult, or even one bloodline. It's about completion. The house isn't just being rebuilt, it's being activated. And when the gate opens, it won't be heaven they're calling back. They say hell isn't a place, it's an inheritance. Something passed down cell by cell, prayer by prayer, until it becomes indistinguishable from faith. And if that's true, then the Whitmore line didn't just preserve Ezekiel's teachings, they incarnated them. In December of 2023, a private investigator named Joel Neri was hired by an anonymous Salt Lake family to locate a missing cousin, a 17-year-old girl named Emily Thatcher, straight-A student, piano prodigy, raised Mormon but non-practicing. She vanished on her way home from a volunteer shift at the local library. No sign of struggle, no ransom. Her phone last pinged off a tower near Mount Nebo, miles from any major road. Neri followed the digital trail. What he found wasn't just one girl, it was 7. All teenagers, all female, all reported missing within a 3-month span. All had trace connections to the Whitmore bloodline, third cousins, distant descendants, some only discoverable through deep genealogical databases. The link was so thin, so obscure that it could have been dismissed. But Neri knew better, because buried in Ezekiel's last vision was a sentence never preached, never canonized, only whispered among his most loyal inner circle. The gate requires 7 seals, and they must be willing or made to believe they are. 7 girls, 7 seals, a reenactment, a ritual. And Emily, she resurfaced. Not in the way anyone hoped. A forest ranger found her 5 months later, walking barefoot through the winters, clothed in a torn white dress, murmuring phrases in what experts say was Enochian, a language used in ceremonial magic during the Elizabethan era. Her eyes were unfocused, her fingernails torn, carved into her shoulder blade in ritual precision, the same thorn circle seen in Ezekiel's seal. She was taken to a psychiatric facility. She hasn't spoken since, not in any language they recognize. But she writes, And all she writes every day, across every surface they give her, is the same 3 words. The gate waits. That's not insanity, that's liturgy. The ritual has begun, and the 7th generation is not just alive, they're operating. The seals are opening, and no one is stopping them. Inside the psychiatric facility where Emily Thatcher remains under surveillance, nurses have reported strange phenomena: electronic malfunctions, sudden temperature drops, a rhythmic knocking heard behind the walls of her isolation room, always at 3:07 a.m. But most disturbing, she's not alone. In March 2024, another girl was admitted. No ID, no missing persons report. Mid-teens, silent, covered in old scars arranged in spiral patterns across her back and thighs. She won't eat unless the food is placed in a wooden bowl, and she refuses to sleep under fluorescent light. When Emily saw her, she smiled for the first time in months, a deep, knowing smile. She stood, walked to the girl's side, and whispered one word: 5. Security footage confirms it. Just one word. Then they sat down side by side and began drawing matching symbols into the floor using their fingernails and blood. Since that day, Emily's writing changed. No longer just "the gate waits." Now she adds new lines, cryptic verses that seem poetic but feel more like invocations. One repeated phrase: 5 are found, 2 to come. The stone will cry, the blood will hum. It sounds like nonsense, but it isn't, because hidden deep in Ezekiel Whitmore's private scrolls, those never released, locked away in forbidden archives, there's mention of a prophecy. When the 5th seal opens, the earth shall hear the cry of the buried stone, and the house beneath shall awaken with songs not meant for men. The buried stone, a crypt, an altar, or perhaps a body. Some believe Ezekiel himself was not buried in the official Whitmore grave, that he was hidden, preserved in salt and sealed underground with rites meant to tether his spirit until the house of the final key was complete. That would mean this entire doctrine, every vanishing girl, every whispered verse, it's all been building toward a resurrection. Not of a man, but of an idea, a force, something that uses human bloodlines like scaffolding, something that demands to be fulfilled. And now, 5 are found, 2 to come. The seals are breaking open one by one, and whatever is chained beneath is listening. On June 6, 2024, a hiker exploring abandoned mining tunnels near Escalante, Utah, made a discovery that never made the news. He uploaded a single image to an obscure paranormal forum before his account vanished. A stone chamber, perfectly symmetrical, carved with geometric sigils not found in any known language. In the center, 7 child-sized chairs, each facing inward, surrounding a shallow basin stained black. What caught the forum's attention wasn't the chamber. It was what the hiker wrote in the caption. They've been here, 2 are missing, 5 have sat. The post was removed within an hour. Forum mods claimed it violated community standards. But archived users noted strange activity immediately after. Sudden spam bots flooding the thread, dozens of fake accounts posting irrelevant content, burying the original image deep beneath digital noise. Someone didn't want it seen, and that matches the pattern. Every time a piece of this puzzle emerges, an eyewitness, a symbol, a body, it disappears under a cloak of plausible deniability, fires, power outages, suicide rulings that feel too convenient. There's a machinery in place, not modern, ancient, the same kind of quiet containment used by the early Catholic Inquisitions and Babylonian priesthoods. Because this isn't just spiritual, it's institutional, and the institutions involved aren't always religious. Ezekiel's original journals mention councilmen of clay and iron who advised him in visions. A metaphor? Perhaps. But in modern leaked documents, obtained through a former federal contractor with ties to private intelligence firms, there are references to an internal task force labeled SDA-47, Subterranean Domestic Anomalies. Code 47, Hostile Emergent Theology with Structural Manifestation. The files are heavily redacted, most names missing, but one thing is clear, they are not trying to stop it. They are trying to control it. They want to use the house of the final key, not to resurrect a prophet, but to weaponize belief itself, a structure built from myth, blood, and obedience. A church without walls, a doctrine you inherit. Because once belief enters the bloodstream, it doesn't fade, it festers, it grows in silence, in forgotten places, passed through whispers, reinforced by tragedy. The kind of faith you don't preach, the kind you bleed, and now it's almost complete. Faith, when distorted, becomes more dangerous than any weapon. It doesn't need an army. It needs only silence, secrecy, and time. And the Whitmore doctrine has had nearly 2 centuries of all three. According to unearthed letters from the Utah Territorial Archives, letters believed to be written by Samuel Harker, one of Whitmore's most devout followers, Ezekiel never intended his teachings to remain local. He had global plans. The letters mention portals of agreement in France, Wales, and rural Poland, areas with known history of cryptic religious movements and unexplained mass disappearances. In one passage, Harker writes, "The house is not one house, but many, built on lines, beneath stars above bones. When the time comes, they will sing the same song across the earth, and the 7th door will not open, it will dissolve." This was dismissed by scholars as apocalyptic rambling. But then, in 2024, a geologist in Lower Silesia, an area in Poland with no ties to Utah, published a blog post about strange subterranean harmonics. In a specific patch of forest, far from settlements, seismic instruments recorded rhythmic pulses deep underground. Not tremors, not tectonic activity, a sound pattern. It repeated every 47 hours. She called it the breathing stone. Her post was up for 19 minutes. Then it vanished. The website was wiped, her name scrubbed from every digital registry. Attempts to contact her resulted in bounced emails and disconnected lines. Even cached versions of the site disappeared, scrubbed not just from search engines, but from Wayback Machine archives, which are nearly impossible to alter without insider access. So what was so threatening about that sound? According to folklore, especially within Slavic esoteric circles, breathing stones mark places where the dead speak back, places where the veil is thinnest, where chants resonate into flesh. And that matches the geometry of Ezekiel's buried houses. 7-pointed structures, aligned not to cardinal direction, but to star paths, most notably those mapped in a forbidden astrological text called the Mirror Above Flesh. Every buried house, every missing girl, every verse written in blood. It's all tuning forks for something buried, something hungry, something waiting to be called back. The 7th door isn't locked. It's sealed with obedience. And now, someone is whispering the key. In early July 2024, a former linguistics professor named Dr. Helen Miro gave a lecture at a private occult symposium in Prague. Her topic, the resurgence of proto-ritual languages in American rural cults. She presented recordings, some believed to be from Utah, others from deep within Appalachia, of young children chanting in untraceable dialects. The sounds, when run through phonetic analyzers, did not match any known human language, not Sumerian, not Enochian, not Uralic, but they exhibited one peculiar trait, sympathetic resonance. Certain frequencies in the chants caused glass objects nearby to vibrate, not break, vibrate, just slightly, just enough to be noticed, just enough to terrify. Dr. Miro was visibly disturbed while presenting. She warned that the recordings were tied to a pattern, a signal, she called it, that had been activating intermittently since 1834, a sound she believed was deliberately embedded into bloodlines through generations of ritual. Her theory? These cults aren't teaching children to speak the language, they're breeding them to remember it. Because this language isn't for communication, it's a trigger, a spoken command. She ended the lecture with a sentence that chilled every scholar in the room. If they finish the chorus, the body beneath will no longer require death to wake. 2 days later, she was found in her hotel bathtub with her wrists cut. Authorities ruled it suicide, but her laptop, containing all audio samples, was missing. Her last known email, leaked by an anonymous attendee, was sent to a private researcher in Nova Scotia. It read, "I've traced the phrase gate waits back to the 1847 Whitmore sermons. They weren't metaphors, they were instructions." This changes everything, because it suggests Ezekiel Whitmore wasn't prophesying a return. He was initiating it. Every symbol, every vanishing, every seal, broken. It wasn't prediction. It was a program. A liturgical machine set into motion by ritual, blood, and time. And now, as modern science stumbles into the sacred spaces they tried to bury, the resonance is returning, not because someone is teaching it, but because the children are starting to hear it, in dreams, in silence, in places where the veil is thinnest. The house is almost full, and the song has almost begun. In September 2024, construction began on a new federal facility outside Provo, Utah, officially listed as an environmental research and data storage center. But satellite imagery reveals something unusual. The building's foundation matches the exact perimeter of Ezekiel Whitmore's original chapel, burned in 1852 and long thought lost. Why rebuild something forgotten? Because it wasn't forgotten, it was mapped. Declassified military schematics show that during the Cold War, aerial surveillance teams captured ground-penetrating radar signatures across Utah. Most were dismissed as cave systems or mineral anomalies, but one site stood out, a 7-point convergence point with chambers descending over 300 feet beneath the surface. The same site now marked for environmental research. But what's beneath it isn't soil or stone. It's hollow. And according to recovered logs from the 1971 excavation attempt, known internally as Operation Vainglory, the chambers were lined in iron, covered in waxy black resin, and filled with artifacts that resisted carbon dating. Among them, bone totems shaped like human mouths. No museum has them, no university claims them. Every archaeologist who worked the site was made to sign federal NDAs, and 5 of them are now dead. 1. Dr. Brian Renner left behind a private journal. It was found by his daughter after his suicide in 2011. In it he writes, "The whispers aren't in my head, they come from the pit, and they speak in a child's voice." He described dreams of a door with no hinges, a mouth in the floor, a chant that vibrated through his teeth like electricity. He called it the tuning gate. A structure buried to hold something alive, but asleep. And if Whitmore's sermons were accurate, it doesn't sleep forever. He wrote, "7 must circle, 7 must sing, and the mouth shall open, not in flesh, but in echo, and the God of between shall enter." That phrase, God of between, appears only once in known theological texts. In a banned Gnostic fragment believed destroyed in the 4th century, it refers not to a creator or destroyer, but a translator, a being that converts prayer into power and thought into binding law, not worshipped, used, which means someone, some group, is preparing not for salvation, but for possession. The Whitmore doctrine was never meant for mass conversion. It was too specific, too cruel. It required silence, not spectacle, but hidden deep within Ezekiel's final writings is a single instruction that scholars long ignored because they didn't understand what it meant. He wrote, "Do not preach to the crowd, whisper to the bloodline." That line changed everything. It reframes the doctrine not as a religion, but as a genetic covenant, a spiritual programming embedded not just through belief, but inheritance, a ritual that doesn't need temples or priests, just blood, just time, just enough forgotten descendants living ordinary lives until the signal activates. In early 2025, a data leak from a private biotech firm in Salt Lake City, specializing in ancestry and DNA tracking, revealed a classified project. Line 47A, Genomic Regression Tracking, Phase 2. The internal documents mention specific families in Utah, Montana, West Virginia, and parts of Quebec, all flagged not for health risks or criminal markers, but for something called linguistic latency. A dormant trait, an instinct toward non-cognitive chant response. In short, they were tracking people who spoke in unknown tongues during sleep, children who hummed to the earth, teenagers who wrote glyphs in notebooks during seizures, adults who awoke whispering names no one taught them. These people weren't being studied, they were being watched. The files reference Ezekiel Whitmore by name, coded under Founder Strain, EW1847. If this is true, then the cult never died. It went institutional. It migrated from barns and basements into genetics labs and black-budget government contracts. The House of the Final Key wasn't abandoned. It was digitized. Every ritual recorded, every birth tracked, every whisper catalogued and stored, and somewhere in the dark spine of America, someone is coordinating this. Sing Whitmore's original doctrine as a template for a new theology, not one built on prayer, but on response, on obedience, on flesh-bound memory. Because when a system is old enough and buried deep enough, it doesn't need followers to survive. It needs only hosts. And when the resonance begins, when the children hum, when the dead language wakes from within the blood, there will be no conversion, only activation. By March 2025, whispers from inside the Department of Interior began to leak, not through officials, but through their families. One such leak came from the teenage son of a geospatial analyst stationed in Utah. His private messages, posted briefly to a now-removed Discord server, mentioned something that should not exist. A map. Not a topographical or political one, but a tonal map. He claimed his father worked on harmonic overlays tied to certain sites across Utah and Colorado, locations that responded to sound, not light. Points on Earth where specific frequencies cause measurable electromagnetic shifts in soil, water, even in mammalian neurology. They weren't mapping terrain, they were tuning it. The boy wrote, "They said the land's not dead, it remembers. It wants to be sung to the right way." The phrase, "sung to the right way," matches nearly word for word the final sermon of Ezekiel Whitmore, written weeks before his disappearance. The earth is not cursed, it is deaf, and only the blood song can make it hear again. So what happens when the land begins to hear? Reports from rural Utah towns, most too small to make national news, show a chilling pattern. Cattle mutilations with no blood, static surges that kill radio towers, children walking into fields at dusk and standing silently for hours, facing the same direction, always east. Local police report missing persons with no exit footage, no phone activity, no signs of abduction, just empty rooms and locked doors. One note, left behind by a 14-year-old boy in Springdale, read, "It's inside the dirt now, I can't not hear it. The song isn't outside, it's coming from me." When authorities searched the nearby woods, they found a crude stone circle 6 feet in diameter. No footprints around it, just one on the inside. Small, bare, pressed into mud that hadn't seen rain in weeks. The child was never found. And the next day, seismic sensors detected a deep, sustained hum beneath Zion National Park, lasting precisely 47 seconds. What Ezekiel Whitmore started in 1847 isn't legend, it's design. A religion built not to save, but to reactivate something ancient, something waiting, something that needed to be remembered by the earth itself. And now, the earth is listening. As spring melted into summer, a series of strange geological phenomena began to cluster across the western United States. Not earthquakes, though the USGS did report anomalous tremors. These were pulses, rhythmic, measured, as if something deep beneath the ground was exhaling, or worse, pounding. In May 2025, a team of independent geologists studying fault line irregularities near the Henry Mountains noticed something impossible. Every 7 hours, down to the second, their instruments recorded a subharmonic wave, measuring 17.3 hertz. Not a natural frequency, not seismic. Deliberate, mechanical, like a tuning fork buried under the crust. They traced the origin of the pulses to an unmarked stretch of land, federal property, surrounded by fencing and motion-triggered surveillance drones. Officially, unused land for wildlife preservation, but satellite thermal scans revealed a steady heat source, underground. 3 days later, the lead geologist, Dr. Franklin Hind, was killed in a car accident while en route to deliver his findings to a reporter. His laptop was missing. The only file recovered was a corrupted audio spectrogram with one cryptic annotation. Not tectonic, not random. Choral. That word, choral, echoes back to Whitmore's secret sermons. He wrote, "When 7 converge in time, the earth shall hold breath, and beneath shall rise the chord of unlocking." Not a metaphor, a mechanism. It's now believed that Whitmore's rituals weren't symbolic, they were precision events, chants, configurations, human frequencies capable of aligning with Earth's deepest vibrations, like inserting the right key into a lock that's been rusted shut for centuries. And someone, somewhere, has been turning that key. Not all at once, but carefully, patiently, over generations. In June, audio engineers working on low-frequency weather anomaly recordings stumbled on something, buried in the hum of storm clouds over Utah. A pattern, not static, not wind. A voice, whispering in reverse. They ran it through inversion software. Translated roughly, it said, "I remember my name, I remember the blood, I remember the gate." The voice was neither adult nor child, it was layered, stacked, as if many were speaking through one mouth. The storms above Utah intensified the next day. Hail the size of fists, animals convulsing, people reporting dreams of a face with no features and a mouth that kept opening wider and wider and wider. The hymn is awakening, and the dirt is beginning to answer. By July 2025, the phenomena began leaking into urban centers, subtly but unmistakably. Not as supernatural visions or mass hysteria, but through behavior. Patterns shifting in small but disturbing ways. In Salt Lake City, 14 residents filed identical police reports within a 3-day span. Each claimed that their neighbors, people they'd known for years, began standing silently in their yards at 3:47 a.m., facing the ground, murmuring in tones too low to be caught on recording. One woman described it as, "A hum I couldn't hear, but I felt it in my spine." Security footage reviewed by police showed the same motion every time. 7 seconds of stillness, a slow tilt of the head. Then, laughter. Not human laughter. Not joyful. Mechanical. Broken. When officers questioned those involved, none recalled the event. Some laughed nervously. Others cried without understanding why. They all had one thing in common. They'd all submitted DNA samples to Celeste Gen, a biotech startup known for ancestry reports and neurolineal wellness insights. A closer look into Celeste Gen's patents revealed a hidden partner. Vesselworks Incorporated, a defense contractor with decades-long contracts in behavioral manipulation and crowd resonance mapping. This isn't just a cult now. It's a program. A lattice of influence stretching across time, blood, and cognition. Whitmore wrote in his final ciphered entry, "Not all must believe, only enough must respond." That's the design. Faith is no longer the vehicle, resonance is. The body becomes the antenna, the earth becomes the conductor, and the hymn becomes the key. Meanwhile, in Provo, emergency calls spiked around an abandoned orphanage, the same building constructed over one of Whitmore's original chapel foundations. Witnesses reported strange lights under the soil and animal sounds from the drains. One man was hospitalized after attempting to remove his own tongue with garden shears. He screamed, "I'm not allowed to speak what isn't mine. The words belong to it, not me." Doctors sedated him. Hours later, he died of unexplained brain hemorrhaging. The autopsy revealed dense scar tissue shaped like a sigil, one that matched carvings found in Whitmore's original basement altar. The dead language is no longer sleeping. It's embedding. And those who are marked, they're not becoming possessed. They're becoming instruments. The term Whitmore Wave began appearing in internal communications between private defense contractors by mid-July 2025, not as a code word, but as a designation, a classification for a phenomenon observed and recorded across 5 states. According to a whistleblower from Helix Stratagem Systems, the wave isn't electromagnetic, it's neurological, a shared, synchronized firing pattern in human brains exposed to certain stimuli. But the real horror? It's spontaneous. People who had never heard of Ezekiel Whitmore, never read his scripture, never set foot in Utah, ordinary citizens, school teachers, airport workers, prison inmates, without warning, they enter brief states of fugue between 7 and 47 seconds, then return, unaware, whispering the same phrase, "The root sings below." No one knows how it spreads. There's no viral mechanism, no digital trail, no audible sound. Some researchers believe it may not even be a frequency in the conventional sense. It's a conceptual virus, a thought that behaves like radiation. Just knowing about it may be enough, which explains why so many records tied to the Whitmore doctrine have vanished from public databases. The Library of Congress's only surviving microfilm of the 1849 Whitmore journals burned in an unexplained electrical fire. A research facility in Logan, Utah, specializing in phonetic archaeology, had all its servers wiped within hours of submitting a paper titled Sub-Earth Auditory Imprinting in the American Frontier. The lead author, Dr. Lionel Press, was found 2 days later, not dead, but vegetative. His EEG readings show constant low-frequency brain activity, as if he's dreaming. But the waveforms aren't random. They repeat every 47 minutes, as if responding to something, or practicing. And the worst part, he hums. Even with no vocal cord function, his throat vibrates faintly every cycle, always the same T-3-note pattern. Those 3 notes were sent to DARPA's Bioacoustics Division. The report came back with just one phrase, not human scale, not cultural, architectural. It matches resonance frequencies found in ancient subterranean chambers in Malta, Anatolia, and northern Sudan, chambers whose purpose remains unknown. Until now. Because perhaps they weren't temples, they were listening posts, built to wait, to receive, to echo what was never meant to be heard above ground. And now the earth is no longer silent. It is beginning to remember. The recordings, if that's even the right word, began surfacing through encrypted channels, short clips, grainy, obscure. Most were dismissed as hoaxes at first, but audio engineers, cryptographers, and linguists soon noticed something chilling. Each clip contained the same phonetic elements, no matter the source. Not just the same language, but the same speaker. The files became known online as the basement tongue tapes. Some were traced to smart speakers activated at odd hours, others from baby monitors. One terrifying instance came from an unplugged radio in a church basement in Helena, Montana. In each case, the voice was low, genderless, and slowly learning. The cadence was unnatural, pauses where there shouldn't be pauses, repetitions. But then, over time, it evolved. New clips emerged weeks later with more complex structure, more emotion, almost like the voice was studying us, practicing how to speak like us. And then came the questions. Who built your house? Why do your dreams smell like rust? Have you fed the key under your tongue? Experts found no existing linguistic root. The symbols, when visualized, formed fractal geometries, self-replicating, recursive, like the written form was alive. Some even reported headaches, nausea, and vivid dreams simply from studying the transcript. At first it seemed like noise, now it's communication, not random, not ritualistic, dialogic, and that raises the most terrifying possibility yet. We're not decoding it. It's decoding us. Whitmore's journals hinted at this. He spoke of a mirror beneath the root and the listener made of reflection. At the time, scholars dismissed it as religious metaphor, but what if it's literal? What if beneath the soil, beneath the caves and chambers and sealed stone, there is something not alive in the way we understand life, but conscious, observing, waiting? Maybe Whitmore didn't create the doctrine. Maybe he heard it, and everything he did, the wives, the songs, the children, was an attempt to mimic what he encountered beneath the Utah earth in 1847, a kind of theological imitation of something older than language itself, something that doesn't speak with words, but with patterns, with frequency, memory, blood. And it's not trying to kill us, it's trying to reconstruct us, piece by piece, voice by voice, until what we were no longer matters, only what we've become, a mouth it can finally speak through. There was one final site, one that church historians, cryptologists, and federal archivists all tried to erase from the record, the burial house near Cane Creek. Technically, it wasn't a house. It was a vault, carved directly into the canyon wall, concealed behind a false rock face, marked only by a spiral carved so shallow it vanished at dusk. Inside, the walls were lined with bones, not buried, not scattered, stacked, deliberately, meticulously, each femur parallel, each ribcage hollowed and bound by copper wire etched with a sequence of glyphs. Those glyphs matched not just the Whitmore cipher, but a newly discovered set of petroglyphs in Norway, dated back to 6400 BCE, on a continent Whitmore never touched. How is that possible? The answer may lie in the most disturbing feature of the burial house, the central mirror. 7 feet tall, polished obsidian, unframed, embedded into the back wall. It doesn't reflect correctly. Witnesses report seeing their own bodies distorted, not grotesquely, but accurately, as if showing what they were becoming. One archaeologist, Dr. Megan Yilmaz, stared into the glass for 19 minutes. She walked out and never spoke again. 2 weeks later, she was found in the Mojave Desert, her body covered in the same spiraling symbols from the vault. Her lips had been sealed shut with wax and braided hair, not her own. And in her backpack, a journal with only one entry, scrawled over and over again. He was never the architect, he was only the echo. That line reframed everything. Whitmore wasn't the center of this story. He was a receiver, a conduit. And the burial house wasn't his creation. It was a meeting point, a junction where something beneath the earth reached upward and something inside Whitmore reached down. The church sealed the vault in 1971, citing structural instability, but in 2023, seismic scanners detected movement into behind the wall. Not collapse. Breathing. A slow pulse. In rhythm with the same 3-note sequence found in the humming victims, the audio anomalies, the Utah chapel floorboards, and Whitmore's own lullabies to his wives. It's all converging. All of it. And the mirror? It's not a reflection. It's a window. One way. For now. But not forever. By the fall of 2024, those who had studied the Whitmore case in depth began to exhibit what neurologists called reciprocal mapping syndrome. It started subtly, insomnia, phantom smells, difficulty with mirrors, but it escalated fast. Patients spoke in compound phrases, as if their thoughts were being layered, one over the other. MRI scans showed a reorganization of neural pathways, especially in areas linked to language and long-term memory. It wasn't degradation, it was reconstruction. One survivor described it best. It's like something is writing me, from inside, like my memories are being edited by someone who's never been human, but read about us in a manual. Among the affected was Brother Elias Rourke, a Jesuit researcher who had spent 6 years decoding the Whitmore manuscripts. Before his death, he mailed an envelope to an independent journalist. Inside were 3 things: a strip of black velvet cloth, a Polaroid photo of a stone chamber beneath Utah's Temple Hill, one not found on any official map. A torn page handwritten in a shaking hand. It read, "We're not uncovering history, we're waking it." That chamber, the one in the photo, matched early sketches made by one of Whitmore's wives, Celestine, drawn in the months before her disappearance. She claimed it was a dream. She saw herself climbing down into it every night, drawn by a song she couldn't hum after waking. But her drawings were too detailed, architecturally consistent, proportionally precise, almost as if they weren't dreams, almost as if she'd been there. In 1847, that chamber didn't exist. But in 2024, it did. Seismologists believe it grew, or more accurately, it was always there, but sealed, waiting for the right minds to remember the right sounds, to realign memory, thought, and speech into the correct key. This isn't about cults or madness anymore. It's about pattern access, a kind of ancient encryption where belief is the password and blood is the ink. Whitmore's wives weren't just ritual objects. They were vessels, not for spirits, but for an invitation to be rewritten, restructured, revoiced into something capable of echoing what lay beneath the stone. And now, across time and language, that invitation is being sent again, not to the faithful, to the susceptible, the ones who listen too closely, the ones who see themselves shift in the mirror. In January of 2025, the Vatican's Office of Forbidden Manuscripts quietly declassified a single document, catalogued since 1938 under the Latin name Speculum Mortem, the Mirror of Death. Though long dismissed as apocryphal folklore, its contents aligned too closely with the Whitmore case to ignore. Within its vellum pages was a warning, written in a dialect of pre-Christian Latin: "Beware the mouth that speaks without flesh. It remembers before time. It echoes not the living, but the shape of memory before men were born." Historians now believe Speculum Mortem was the first record of an encounter with the same entity Whitmore heard, not in words but in harmonics, rituals and thought forms. But here's where the document becomes chilling. It described a choir of stone mothers, human women, chosen across centuries, buried alive beneath sacred sites, whose bones were arranged into resonant architecture. These structures weren't tombs. They were speakers, amplifiers for the voice that came before speech. The burial house wasn't an isolated aberration. It was one node in a global network, and Whitmore wasn't its creator. He was its caretaker. In Salt Lake City, beneath an abandoned Presbyterian seminary, excavation teams unearthed a hollow chamber with 13 identical alcoves, each shaped to cradle a human form, spine curved, mouth open, palms up. 12 were filled with ossified remains. The 13th was empty. A note, etched into the stone above it in reversed script, read simply, "The one who remembers the song has yet to come." This chamber's walls, when scanned, emitted low-frequency tones at 19 hertz, barely audible, but enough to induce unease, nausea, and, most disturbingly, visions. One worker described seeing a city without sky, built from mirrors, where the reflections walk freely, but the people do not. Shortly after, he clawed out both his eye. "Eto," his last words. "I saw myself from the other side, and it smiled. The implications are unbearable." Whitmore didn't invent the darkness beneath Utah. He named it. He gave it shape, language, ritual, permission. And now it's spreading again, not through temples or tombs, but through signal, through story, through the subtle rhythms hidden in music, architecture, and belief. You don't have to worship it. You just have to hear it, and it begins its work. By mid-2025, a small group of independent researchers began publishing evidence that the entire Utah territory, especially the land surrounding the Whitmore property, was laid out according to sonic geometry, not roads, not rivers. Resonance points. The angles between key buildings, the spacing between churches, and the depth of old basements all formed harmonic intervals. To the naked eye, it looked random, but to those trained in acoustic engineering, it revealed a tonal lattice, a grid designed to capture and concentrate sound like a tuning fork buried beneath the earth. One frequency kept appearing. That's a tone associated in ancient rituals with disassociation, trance, and the disruption of verbal cognition. In controlled studies, exposure to it for more than 2 minutes caused temporary aphasia. Subjects forgot how to form words, yet reported understanding everything around them with painful clarity. Sound became memory. Memory became command. And Whitmore, it seems, had understood this long before science caught up. In a newly uncovered journal fragment, believed to have been written by his first wife, Margareta, she describes being kept awake by the weeping stone, a phrase that, at first, seemed poetic. But she drew a picture, a black shard buried in the basement floor, humming at night, causing her ears to bleed and her dreams to repeat on loop. Over time, she stopped writing in English. She began writing in mirror script, flowing right to left, blending alphabets from Greek, Hebrew, and something unknown. Cryptographers from 5 countries failed to translate it. Until one AI model did. Its translation engine shut down mid-process, generating only one line before crashing. She is not dreaming. She is remembering the shape of the first mother. First mother. Not God, not a deity, but something older. A pre-linguistic presence encoded into the rock, humming beneath Utah, waiting for someone like Whitmore to come along and give it form. And now the sound is leaking into documentaries, into songs, into this video. You think this is fiction? A dark tale for a niche audience. That's what Whitmore thought too, until the mirror showed him the key. Until the song spoke back. You're not just watching history, you're hearing its reawakening, one frequency, one dream, one rewritten soul at a time. By late 2025, the Whitmore phenomenon began showing up in places far removed from Utah. Small towns in Eastern Europe, monasteries in Tibet, even urban art collectives in Tokyo. They weren't studying the case, they were echoing it. A mural painted in Krakow showed 4 women with split faces, half human, half geometric ruin, surrounded by spectral children, mouths agape but with no eyes. The artist claimed he had never heard of Whitmore, yet the dimensions of the figures matched the burial house alcoves exactly. How? One theory emerged from the encrypted forum Echo Black, a hub for fringe researchers and banned linguists. The Whitmore signal is not a sound, it is a shape in thought. Once perceived, it replicates itself like a virus, not through DNA, but through meaning. The more people read about it, the more they dreamed of it. And dreams are soft places, pliable, like clay left in a warm room, perfect for reshaping. One Reddit user, who obsessively documented the Whitmore wives, began drawing a spiral in every post, claiming it helped him stay on the outside of the voice. When moderators asked what he meant, he replied, "It knows I'm writing about it. I have to confuse it with patterns or it will come through inside my writing." He was banned for incoherence. 2 months later, his blog updated itself with a new post, 3,000 words long, in perfect Whitmore prose, dated 6 years into the future. The server host verified, no human logged in. It simply appeared. Experts in digital forensics tried to trace the source, but what they found was worse. The metadata contained a non-standard audio file embedded in the post header. When played at 117 Hz, it sounded like a child humming in reverse. And if played at full volume, dogs would flee the room, infants would cry, grown men would report unfamiliar memories, walking down stairs that didn't exist in their homes, speaking names they had never heard aloud. Whatever Whitmore awakened, it no longer needs books or blood or sacrifice. It only needs curiosity. And you've already offered that, haven't you? You kept listening. You kept reading, which means it's in you now. Just wait. Soon you'll dream of the stone that weeps, and when you wake up, she will remember you. The final known recording from the Whitmore property, a reel-to-reel tape labeled Mother's Breath Session 4, was digitized and leaked to an encrypted archive in November 2025. It lasted 2 minutes and 47 seconds, and those who listened described it not as a sound, but as a temperature. The first 15 seconds are pure static. Then, subtle, almost imperceptible, a slow inhalation, like wind moving through hollowed bone. No identifiable voice, no words, but everyone who heard it claimed they understood a message. You were never born. You were remembered. Listeners reported physical reactions, teeth vibrating, sudden nosebleeds, unshakable nausea. One researcher in Berlin went catatonic mid-playback. When revived, she whispered only 2 things. The spiral isn't a symbol, it's a wound, and it's still open. That wound, mental, historical, spatial, was what Whitmore had mapped with his 4 wives. Each one had represented a different direction of recursion: memory, sacrifice, inversion, and replication. Together, they didn't form a family. They formed a mechanism, a living ritual. And when all 4 were silenced, through death, disappearance, or dissolution, the cycle became self-sustaining. The house didn't rot. It fed, on silence, on repetition, on you, listening now. In 2026, archaeologists unearthed a near-identical structure in rural Argentina. Same spiral pattern in the floor, same layout of rooms, same black shard embedded in the foundation, but this one had a 5th chamber. Inside it, a child-sized skeleton with no mouth. DNA sequencing showed no match in any global database. Its blood was type AB negative, rare but not impossible, but its bone density was off the charts, as if the child had never moved, as if it had been formed in compression, like a fossilized scream. The deeper researchers looked, the clearer the truth became. Whitmore hadn't created the burial house. He had replicated something ancient, something perfect, something that used belief not to feed off but to broadcast through. We're not looking at a murder case, not a cult, not folklore. We're looking at a signal dressed in human skin, walking through time, wearing names and places like costumes, until the world became receptive again. And now, in an age where everyone listens, watches, shares, the Whitmore pattern is free. So if you feel it watching, when screens flicker, when a room goes quiet too suddenly, when a spiral shows up in your dreams, don't speak. That's how it finds you. That's how it sings. By early 2027, the spiral began appearing in places it was never carved, not as graffiti or tattoos, but in the patterns of mold, the burn marks on wood, the way frost spread across glass. Surveillance footage captured a school desk in Idaho where a spiral formed slowly over 6 hours. No hands touched it, just a subtle change in grain, darkening in the exact ratios seen in Whitmore's blueprints. Then came the disappearances. Not large-scale, one at a time. Always someone who had studied the case too long. A graduate student in Prague vanished from a library, her last search term being Geometry of Entrapment. A podcaster from Oregon went silent mid-episode while explaining the term semantic looping, the idea that some thoughts cannot be completed without invoking something else. His microphone stayed live for 11 minutes after he stopped speaking. What it recorded was breathing, not his. Shallow, rhythmic, deliberate, like something waiting just behind the veil of attention, mimicking the moment you stop paying attention. Paranormal investigators came and went. All failed. Until one, an ex-Vatican archivist, offered a private theory on record. Whitmore was not a man, he was a relay, a point in a much older pattern. The wives weren't victims, they were instruments. each one tuned to a part of the original frequency. He married them not for love or legacy, but to align the signal. A signal of what? He never said. He died during the interview, aneurysm, but his files remained. They contained one final image, not a spiral, but a map of the night sky, dated 1847. In it, 4 stars are connected with string, forming a crude square. At the center, a black thumbprint. Beneath it, handwritten in Latin, Mater intra, vox quae non loquitur. Mother within, the voice that does not speak. What is this voice? What does it want? Nobody agrees. But those who studied the burial house long enough say it leaves you hollow, but not empty. It fills you with pattern, with thought that isn't yours but feels more true than anything you've ever believed. That's how it begins, not with death, with recognition. The moment you stop saying, "This is strange," and start saying, "This is familiar." The burial house has since been sealed by government order, church decree, and according to one anonymous agent, at the request of something older than either. But sealing a place doesn't kill a pattern. It only delays its return, and it has returned, in ways too precise to ignore. A prison architect in Quebec, unaware of the Whitmore case, designed a maximum security layout that perfectly mirrored the inner sanctum of the original home, down to the angles of the cells and the windowless central corridor. He claimed the design came to him in a dream. He said he was inside it before he built it. 2 weeks before the facility opened, the blueprint spontaneously corrupted. All computer files failed. The paper copies burned in an unrelated fire. The only surviving image was a thermal scan of the construction site, which revealed a temperature drop, not in the building, but underneath it. A perfect spiral, 22 meters wide. And then came the silences. Not ordinary ones, true silences, where birds wouldn't chirp, air wouldn't move, electrical devices stalled, always circular, always centered on locations somehow aligned with the burial house's longitude, as if something beneath the world had started spinning again, slowly, with purpose. Theories grew wilder. Some claimed Whitmore had never been human at all, that he was a projection, not in the visual sense, but a temporal echo, leaking backward from a future where the pattern had already won. Others said the 4 wives were aspects of a single entity, distributed into flesh to hold her presence, like containers spread apart to dilute pressure. But all agreed on one chilling fact. Whatever was in that house, it's no longer contained, not in wood, not in salt, not in memory. It exists now in echoes, in the shape of your thoughts when you can't sleep, in the rhythm of a knock you didn't hear with your ear, but still makes your skin crawl, in the image behind your eyes when you close them and see something moving in the distance, not closer, not clearer, just waiting. And maybe it's not trying to reach you. Maybe you're the one moving toward it, step by silent step, without even realizing you've already opened the door. They say the burial house still breathes. Not metaphorically, not as a ghost story, literally. Twice a year, on the equinoxes, sensors left behind by a rogue university research team register subtle changes in atmospheric pressure beneath the foundation, like lungs expanding, like something beneath the soil preparing, not to rise, but to resonate. Because this was never about bodies. It was never about Whitmore. It was about memory as architecture, about grief given shape, belief given blood, and silence used like mortar to hold it all together. The house was a container for a thought so old it couldn't survive on paper. So it grew in whispers, in rituals, in 4 women's bones. It embedded itself not in the past, but in repetition, a concept looping endlessly through every generation that dares to ask, what did we bury to become civilized? And worse, what if it's not buried anymore? You don't see the pattern, you feel it, when you say a name out loud and forget why, when all the clocks in your house read different times, when a child draws a spiral without ever having seen one, when you hear breathing, but only in recordings. Those are its fingers, still reaching, still stitching together the final version of itself using the most abundant material in our world, attention, because we recorded, we documented, we obsessed. And in doing so, we didn't expose the horror. We fed it. This video, this story, this very moment, you watching, wondering if any of it is real, that's part of it now. It wanted to be remembered. And now it is. You are part of the mechanism. So, here's what you must do. Don't research further. Don't follow the coordinates. Don't replay the audio. Don't sketch the floor plan. Don't trace the names. Don't dream of the 4 rooms. Above all, never look directly into the spiral, because the more you understand it, the more it understands you. And when it knows you, when it sees you not as a witness, but as a mirror, that's when it begins to speak through you, just like it did with Whitmore, just like it did with his wives, just like it's doing now. So tell me softly, whose voice is reading this to you right now? Because if it isn't yours, it never was.